January 2026. When people in Venezuela woke up that morning, they didn't notice anything unusual at first. The streets were still there, the buildings were still there, the cities looked the same as always. But as the hours passed, the same question began to form in everyone's mind. Was something missing at the top of the state? What was going on? Because the news spreading throughout the day pointed to something far more than an ordinary political development. Nicolás Maduro was no longer in Venezuela. More importantly, there were rumors that this was not an internal development. Here, we need to pause and think. What does it mean when a country's leader disappears overnight? Is this a moment of liberation or the beginning of a far more complex process? History has shown us time and again. Leaders leave, but systems do not always leave with them. Sometimes the absence of a leader collapses the system. Sometimes it makes the system even harsher and more uncontrollable. According to what has been reported, what happened was not a classic military intervention. There was no large-scale invasion, no weeks-long bombardment. Instead, there was a limited but highly targeted operation. One more in line with modern concepts of warfare. Not the entire state, but the decision-making center was targeted. Communication systems were disabled, military reflexes were paralyzed, and the entire structure was separated from its leader before it could even understand what was happening. At this point, a critical question must be asked. If a state truly consists of its leader, does it collapse when that leader is removed? Or do the networks of interests, the system of fear, and the chains of loyalty built over years continue to stand on their own? Venezuela's story has a long history of searching for an answer to this question. Once one of Latin America's richest countries, Venezuela experienced prosperity thanks to oil and became a regional center of attraction. But this prosperity was based not on production, but on a single resource. Instead of diversifying the economy, the state relied on oil revenues. Institutions were not strengthened, the legal system was not solidified. Everything was planned around the existence of oil. When oil prices fell, this structure began to collapse. It was at this exact moment that Hugo Chavez emerged. Society was tired, angry, and looking for someone to blame. Chavez read these emotions very well. He targeted the system, the elites, and foreign powers. He did not offer people complex solutions, but a simple story. The problem is not you, the problem is them. This narrative was convincing for large segments of the population. During the Chavez era, Venezuela changed direction not only domestically but also in foreign policy. The United States was no longer defined as a partner but as an enemy. Relations with actors such as Cuba, Russia, China, and Iran were ideological as much as they were strategic. These relationships gave the regime breathing room, but they also pushed the country toward a more closed, harsher, and more fragile structure. When Chavez died, he left behind not strong institutions, but a personalized model of power. Nicolás Maduro was a continuation of this model, but he lacked Chávez's social charisma. At the same time, global conditions had changed, oil prices had fallen, and the economy was rapidly shrinking. From that point on, things for Venezuela deteriorated irreversibly. As the economy collapsed, the regime became more repressive. As the state lost its legal sources of income, it turned toward illegal areas. Drug trafficking, illegal mining, and relationships with regional armed groups became part of the system. The army was no longer just a security force, it also became an economic actor. Generals turned into businessmen. At this point, an unavoidable question arose: can such a structure really be dismantled simply by removing its leader? The Guaido process in 2019 attempted to answer this question with temporary hope. International recognition, sanctions, and diplomatic pressure shook the regime, but they were not enough to bring it down. Because the army remained in place, because external support was not cut off, because the opposition failed to achieve unity within itself. As the years passed, patience in Washington wore thin. Sanctions were weakening the regime, but not eliminating it. Diplomacy was not producing results. Venezuela, meanwhile, began to be seen by the United States not only as an ideological problem, but as a security risk. Migration waves, drug trafficking, and Russian-Iranian influence reinforced this perception. What happened in early 2026 is described as the result of this accumulated pressure. But there is a critical point here. The removal of Maduro does not mean that Venezuela will automatically stabilize. On the contrary, the most dangerous period begins right now, because the leader may be gone, but the weapons are still there. The networks of interest are still in place. The loyalty relationships have not yet been dissolved. The opposition faces both a great opportunity and a great risk. Figures like Maria Corina Machado have been preparing for this moment for years. Reform plans, economic opening projects, and goals of integration with the West are ready. But implementing these plans is not just about winning an election. It requires a compromise with the structures that hold power, and the price of such a compromise is always uncertain. Here, the audience must be asked a fundamental question. Which comes first in a country, justice or stability? Can a new order be built without reckoning with the past? Or do such reckonings create new conflicts? The initial reaction of the Venezuelan military was noteworthy. There was no call for fierce resistance. Instead, there was an emphasis on maintaining order. Did this indicate indecision within the army, or did it mean negotiations had already begun behind closed doors? The answer is not yet clear, but history tells us this. Those who hold power calculate very carefully what they stand to lose and what they might gain. There is also another set of actors that are the hardest to control. Paramilitary groups that were armed for years to protect the regime. These structures are not bound by diplomacy or political transition plans. For them, the collapse of order means the beginning of chaos. And chaos is the environment they know best. The international dimension is another crucial part of this story. Actors like Russia and China have significant investments in Venezuela. Will they quietly accept the disappearance of these investments, or will they take steps to complicate the process? Direct military intervention does not seem likely, but indirect methods are always possible. In conclusion, Venezuela is standing at a crossroads today. On one side lies the possibility of reconstruction, economic recovery, and international integration. On the other side lies the risk of prolonged instability, internal conflict, and a regional crisis. Which path it will take depends on the decisions made in the coming days. At this point, one final question must be asked. How many countries in history have truly healed through foreign intervention? Will Venezuela be one of these exceptions, or will it be remembered as yet another cautionary tale? This story is not finished yet. The leader is gone, but the real test begins now. Because the fate of a country is not determined in a single night, but by the decisions made afterward. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe. History does not repeat itself, but if we fail to learn its lessons, it hits back very hard.